Good morning everyone. It's wonderful to be back in front of you all. It feels ages since we were all together and I suspect it's going to be quite a while before we can meet in person again. But today we've got our first online monthly meeting. I'm going to start, as usual, with thank yous. Thank you to you for sticking together and keeping our U3A going through this very strange time. Thank you for participating in your groups in new ways, different ways. Thank you to group leaders for facilitating all of that through Zoom, through WhatsApp, through telephone calls, through whatever, all sorts of things I'm hearing about. Thank you also for all the lovely notes that we're receiving saying how great it is that you are able to keep together. Thank you, I think, to everybody for trying their best and being loyal to Fleet U3A so that we can get up and running and be back to our vibrant self as soon as we are able. We don't know when that is, but it will be soon, we hope. Today is a bit of an experiment. It's the first online monthly meeting and we're using YouTube as the vehicle or the platform, whatever the technical word is. We'd be very interested to know what you think of that and whether you think this is a successful way of continuing if we are going to have to do this into the future in the autumn, or whether you know of different ways, better ways that we can keep together and keep each other informed and entertained and just being together. As usual, I'm going to stop now and hand over to John, who you know is our monthly meeting secretary, and he is going to introduce our speaker today. Over to John.
Thank you, Paddy. Well, this is an exciting moment. Normally my job is to introduce the speaker without probably the faintest clue of how good their talk is going to be. On this occasion, I'm half an hour ahead of you. I've seen and enjoyed the presentation that Morris and his technical assistant Jerry have put together, and it is stunning. Many of you might know Morris as one of the doyens of the Fleet Film Society, and after this presentation I'm sure you'll agree with me there's not much about film in the Fleet area that Morris doesn't know. During the presentation, I hope you'll sing along with the song, and maybe, like me, you'll have shared the same experience as Anne Kent in encountering movies long ago. Well, that's enough from me. Let's start.
Hello, I'm Morris Kent. Welcome to my talk, which is essentially about the history of cinema in our area and my involvement and knowledge of it. I have been a film fan all of my life, and to say otherwise would most certainly be an understatement. Here is a shot of me standing in front of the gym and fitness studio between Crookham Crossroads and the Foresters pub. I was born here in 1941 above the shop, where my father, Dave Kent, ran his cycle and motorcycle business. Here is a picture of my father standing in front of the shop. You may not be able to see it from the picture, but the price of a gallon of petrol was 1 shilling 5.5 pence, which is about 7 pence in today's money. How times have changed. The next thing you're going to see is me standing in Fleet High Street. For when I was born, the main cinema in the area was here, just about where the Phyllis Tuckwell shop and the nail bar is. This was the site of the former 357-seat King George V cinema. It opened in 1937 and seated 610 in the stalls and 164 in the circle. The cinema was taken over by Odeon Theatres in 1939 and renamed the Odeon in 1946. My first association with the Odeon cinema in Fleet was with Saturday morning pictures. I would catch the number 8 bus from Crookham Crossroads, which is just down the road, to the Oak Chief. Entrance, if my memory serves me correctly, was 6 pence. The show always started with Mr. Shields at the piano playing the Odeon Saturday morning song. We come along on Saturday morning, greeting everybody with a smile. Amazingly, after all of this time, I can still remember the words to this day. Here is a clip of the Saturday morning show.
Ready, Uncle Ernie? Right, let's go. We come along on Saturday morning, greeting everybody with a smile. We come along on Saturday morning, knowing it's well worthwhile. As members of the GB Club, we all intend to be good citizens when we grow up, and champions of the three. We come along on Saturday morning, greeting everybody with a smile, 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 greeting everybody with a smile. Now once again, Uncle Ernie, 1, 2. We come along on Saturday morning, greeting everybody with a smile. We come along on Saturday morning, knowing it's well worthwhile. As members of the GB Club, we all intend to be good citizens when we grow up, and champions of the free. We come along on Saturday morning, greeting everybody with a smile, 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 greeting everybody with a...
There then followed a programme of short films, documentaries, Lauren Hardy, cartoons, and always a serial. Flash Gordon comes to mind. Here's a clip from a 1936 Flash Gordon serial, and as someone remarked, special effects at their finest. Just love this stuff. Incidentally, this is the only serial which has been selected for preservation in the Library of Congress National Film Registry.
Majesty, we have captured the Earth people.
Was there any resistance?
No, Your Majesty, except from the blonde giant.
Your eyes, your hair, your skin. I've never seen one like you before. Ah, you are beautiful.
You keep your slimy hands off her, and you grab him!
The Odeon closed on the 12th of December 1957. The last film was Hell Drivers with Stanley Baker. I was there for the last performance. It was a sad day, but my joy with the cinema was not lost. I've changed locations because this is a shot of me standing at the QEB development in Church Crookham, which was originally the QEB barracks. Now, although the Odeon had closed, there was a cinema in Church Crookham, and it was the Globe, run by the AKC, the Army Cinema Corporation, and it was where I'm standing in this shot. Now, although it was an army cinema, it was open to the public, and so that was where I could now go. The Globe was a proper cinema with 340 seats and only opened in the evenings. It was equipped with two 35mm projectors and if I remember correctly, the programme changed 5 times a week. The film Rio Bravo, illustrated in this Globe programme poster, opened in 1959. Here I will take a moment to digress, as Rio Bravo was directed by John Ford. Now, I love westerns and regard Ford as one of the great directors of this genre. One of his films was My Darling Clementine, featuring Henry Fonda as Wyatt Earp and Victor Mature as Doc Holliday. Here is a clip entitled 3 Reasons for Watching My Darling Clementine.
10,000 cattle gone astray, left my range and traveled away, and the sons of guns,
Let's talk a while.
Go. Have left me dead broke today, in gambling halls delaying, 10,000 cattle straying, in gambling halls delaying, 10,000 cattle straying. Oh my darling, Clementine.
What do they call this place?
Just over the rise there, big town, called Tombstone.
Well, we sure want to thank you, Mr.
Earp. Wyatt Earp. It's Doc Holliday, fellas.
We'll be waiting for you, Marshal, at the OK Corral.
Now, John Ford, who directed that film, worked on more than 60 films in the silent era, and he actually met Wyatt Earp. The famed lawman spent the last years of his life in California as a consultant on silent movie cowboy films. Earp described the gunfight at OK Corral to him and drew it out on paper. Ford used a sketch to film the fight in My Darling Clementine. John Wayne also met Earp, and Wayne credited his walk, talk and persona to his acquaintance with him. Earp died in 1929 at the age of 80. Coming back to the Globe, the manager was Frank Rose, who was a wily old fox. You needed to be controlling a bunch of squaddies, one of whom was Oliver Reed. When the film Rock Around the Clock opened, some cinemas had riots, not at the Globe. I remember Frank standing at the front addressing his audience. Now look here, you lot. On the wall up there is a box, and it senses the sound in the auditorium. If the noise is excessive, it automatically cuts off the soundtrack, and it takes 10 minutes to get the sound back. Of course, it was all rubbish, but it did the trick. I cannot remember exactly how, but somehow in the early 1960s I got a job there and finished up for a period of about 2 years as a projectionist. One projectionist could run the cinema on his own, and here I oversaw these 2 35mm carbon arc projectors. Films would be delivered by the Film Transport Company every Thursday and Sunday mornings. The FTC delivered to all the cinemas in the area. The Globe was fully equipped with cinemascope, screen masking, curtains, and a record deck for incidental music. Now, I always tried to find suitable music. On one occasion, we were screening The Big Country the following evening, and we already had the film. Now, The Big Country has a fantastic musical score by Jerome Moross. So I loaded up the first reel and played the opening titles, but no picture, over the audio system. Here is the title sequence with the film's theme. A reel of 35mm cinema film is 2,000 feet in length and arrives in a can on a central core. Here's the picture. This needs to be transferred onto the cinema's own spools before it can be projected. Now, 2,000 feet of film lasts about 20 minutes, and so a 2-hour feature would be on 6 reels, hence the requirement to have 2 projectors, changing over without the audience knowing every 20 minutes, thus providing a continuous show. Now, running a projection box on your own would be remarkably busy, and you certainly needed your wits about you. To me, it was all about presentation. I would always start the show by fading down the incidental music whilst projecting the British Board of Film Censor certificate on the closed curtains, and then open the curtains as the certificate faded to the start of the film. If it was a CinemaScope film, then I would then open the screen masking to full CinemaScope width. Sadly, these days, cinemas are not even equipped with curtains. Without going into too much detail, changeover from one projector to another after 20 minutes just demanded concentration. Changeover required the projectionist to observe 2 cue marks at the top of the right-hand corner of the screen. The cue marks are on screen for 1/6 of a second. You dare not blink. Here's a picture of the 2 projectors. Now, I would be standing between the 2 projectors. The film is running on the right-hand projector, and the left-hand projector is loaded with number 7 in the picture gate. On the first cue mark, I start the left projector, open the dowser, which is the handle sticking out at the side, which lets the light through onto the running film, and on the second cue mark, I switch to the left-hand projector by operating an interlinked shutter system in front of the projector with my left hand and switching over the sound with my right hand. Here is a projectionist doing a changeover so that you can see how it actually worked.
Strike the carbon. Watch the screen for the cue dots.
Now look carefully and you'll see the first dot where I turn the motor on.
And that's it. Now on this machine.
The audience would probably and hopefully be oblivious to what has just happened. Fortunately, I never failed to mess up a changeover. And changeovers would always be at a point in the film where there was no dialogue or action. Having said that, things did occasionally go wrong. I did show a trailer through closed curtains once, and another time I had the CinemaScope lens on upside down and half the film appeared on the wall. I spent about 2 years at the Globe, and although I was now pursuing a career in engineering, I seriously had the film bug and decided to do my own thing. My parents had given me a 16mm sound film projector for my 16th birthday, and I updated this to a more modern one. Here's a picture of my more modern projector. Now, a reel of 16mm film would last 45 minutes, so it would necessitate stopping and changing reels once or twice during a feature film. Since the projector would automatically self-lace, it would take less than a minute to load a film into it, but that's considerably shorter than commercial breaks on television. I hired feature films from the major film companies and showed them in various locations throughout the area. I also did a Saturday morning show at Courtmore School. I would present a program of cartoons lasting about an hour, and parents would drop their children off at school before going shopping. Included in the admission charge was, of course, the inevitable ice cream. Transporting my equipment around in the early days was a bit of a problem, as I only had a Lambretta scooter. Here's a picture of a Lambretta scooter, which some of you may remember. Nevertheless, I would position the projector between my feet, and the speaker and films would be on the pillion and carrier. Eventually, I purchased a Reliant three-wheeler. Del Boy, eat your heart out. Now, here's a picture of it, and I've got to say this made things a whole lot easier, but also a whole lot safer. Now, I never made any money out of showing films. Costs were really prohibitive. Film rental was not cheap. Rental for a feature film such as North by Northwest would be £10 for a single screening. And a 7-minute Tom and Jerry film cartoon would cost £1, 10 shillings. There was, however, a silver lining, as I could purchase a film poster. Have a look at this one. A quad poster, 30 by 40, was 3 shillings in old money, about 15p in new money. And I had posters for Dr. No, From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, Jailhouse Rock, The Searchers, and many more. But more of this later. Now, although the Fleet Cinema had closed, fortunately Aldershot had 5 cinemas to choose from. Here is a picture of the Alexandra. Now, the Alexandra in Alexandra Road, of course, was opposite to where Morrison's and the Cineworld complex is. Built on the site of a music hall, where Charlie Chaplin made his stage debut, the cinema opened in 1909 and eventually was taken over by the Odeon theatre chain in 1939. It was always busy and often pulled a coup by showing new releases before the Odeon and ABC cinemas in the town. It used to have a commissionaire in full uniform to control the crowds, and the cinema would often show the house full sign. Weren't they the days? The last film shown was Disney's The Jungle Book in 1967. It was then sold to Star Cinemas, who turned it over to Bingo, and the cinema was demolished in 1986. Now, both the Empire and Ritz ABC cinemas were situated adjacent to the Princess Gardens. Here is a picture. The Empire was primarily built as a cinema, but it also had a large stage and its own Compton organ on a lift. Built on land previously occupied by the Royal Engineers, it opened in 1930 with Alf's Button. The auditorium was built on 2 levels, stalls and a horseshoe-shaped balcony, and had seating for 1,599. Here's a picture of the auditorium. There was also a restaurant over the main entrance. The cinema changed hands several times, and the capacity was reduced to 1,458, and the organ was removed in 1959 and taken to the Galston Palace Theatre near Great Yarmouth. The cinema was renamed the Odeon, part of the Rank organisation, in 1964 and eventually closed in 1981. It was later taken over by the Christian organisation and called the King's Centre. The church moved out in August 2015 and the new owners reopened the building as the Aldershot Empire, a mixed-use venue. Now, I used to visit the projection box on occasion, as I sometimes had films delivered there by the film transport company. Eventually, the film transport companies delivered films to my house, which was, of course, Dave Kent Motorcycles. If my memory serves me correctly, I was there one day and they were showing Lawrence of Arabia, and the chief projectionist mentioned that when they opened up on the first screening, they discovered to their horror that the film version they had was in a foreign language. They had to stop the screening and a new print was rushed down from Columbia Pictures in Wardour Street. Here I digress because I'm going to talk about Lawrence of Arabia, and here is a picture from Lawrence. As I said, I will digress. Lawrence of Arabia was directed by David Lean, possibly the greatest British film director there ever was. I'm sure you remember some of his films: Brief Encounter, The Sound Barrier, The Bridge on the River Kwai, and Dr. Zhivago. Now, I've read many books on David Lean, and 2 stories come to mind. Dr. Zhivago was almost entirely shot in Spain, and audiences don't realise, well, they're not meant to, that much of the snow is not snow at all. To recreate the snow needed to cover vast stretches of countryside, they used tons of crushed white marble dust from a local marble works. Hedgerows in the distance were draped with white plastic sheets, and whitewash was sprayed on the trees. For the falling snow, hard polystyrene billets were milled into shavings. Thousands of sacks of the stuff were used. And to get the sleighs to slide through the snow in a realistic way, little roller skate wheels were fitted on the runners. At the house in Verikino, plaster was used to create the effect of snow and ice, and the icicles were made of candle grease. Freddie Young, the cinematographer, shot the scene through a blue filter to give it an extra coldness. Now here is a clip entitled The Frozen House from Dr. Zhivago. Another incident occurred during the filming of Lawrence of Arabia at Wadi Rum in Jordan. The cast and crew were brought in by air every day with a superannuated Dakota. Anthony Quinn refused to travel on any two-engined plane, so a four-engined Heron was chartered from the Royal Jordanian Air Force. Clearly, money was not an object. As the plane approached, the pilot unfortunately forgot to put the undercarriage down, and it belly landed in a mammoth cloud of dust. As the dust settled, everybody looked on, wondering what was going to happen next. Quinn got out. He was wearing a false nose, and his face was exceedingly white, except for the false nose, which was dead brown. All Quinn said was, "At least it saved the effing steps," and walked off. Back to the cinemas in Aldershot. The picture again shows the Ritz ABC, which opened in 1937 with Peter Lorre in Crack Up and Rochelle Hudson in Woman at Wise. Built by the Union Cinemas, it originally had a Wurlitzer 3-manual /7 Ranks organ with illuminated console and grand piano installed, and it was opened by Harold Ramsey playing at the time. The film Easter Parade, shown in the picture, opened in 1948. This is a picture of the auditorium, and it shows from the circle, and it shows the Wurlitzer at extreme right. Now, the Wurlitzer organ pipes were below the stage console, and the sound shutters were at floor level, either side of the console. The auditorium was decorated in pastel shades of apricot, peach, pink, and grey, not like they are today. And at the time, I was having piano lessons, and on occasions I went with my teacher, as he was allowed to play the Wurlitzer, and it is quite something to hear it playing as it rises through the floor. This picture shows Richard Dimbleby at the console when he visited to do a charity concert. So let's have a listen to a Wurlitzer organ. So here is the clip.
Mike Grandchamp, and I'm the organist at the Fitzgerald Theater in St. Paul. And the organ behind me is the mighty Wurlitzer pipe organ that I play. I started playing the organ when I was 14 in a roller rink, and then played mostly in supper clubs, and then fell in love with the Wurlitzer theater pipe organ in the early 1970s. The Wurlitzer has huge variety in terms of sound. It's a 25-piece orchestra, plus a rhythm section with all the percussion instruments. And it has a tremendous dynamic range, and it also has an immense amount of drama when you play. A pipe organ is generally a classical instrument, and it's made for playing maybe sacred music or the music of Bach. And a theater organ is really what's called a unit orchestra. And so you have different kind of pipes that would be more orchestral in nature, all the percussion instruments, and the organ was really designed to play symphonic music and pop music of the 1920s. I think the most challenging thing for me about playing the organ is when I accompany silent films and finding just the right music to match the action, and then rehearsing it over and over again so it fits perfectly behind the silent film. With silent films, originally it was piano accompaniment. Then that increased to having an orchestra. And the motion picture theaters figured out that it was a lot cheaper to buy a Wurlitzer pipe organ than it was to hire a 25-piece orchestra. And the Wurlitzer has a glockenspiel, xylophone, tuned sleigh bells, cathedral chimes, a marimba, and when you put them all together, it's a lot of fun.
The cinema was built to compete with the Odeon next door, and as well as showing movies, in the mid-1960s it also staged pop shows starring Gene Pitney, Cilla Black, etc. And in 1961 it was renamed the ABC and had seating for 1,747 people. The ABC closed in 1977 and was converted into a 3-screen cinema and bingo club, with seating for 313, 187 and 150. It was taken over by Canon in 1986 and closed in 2003. The picture shows the Picture Palace in Station Road, which was built on the grounds of the Aldershot Institute and opened in 1912. The auditorium was built on 2 levels as well, stalls and balcony, and had a capacity of 706. By 1941, the cinema was showing 2 changes weekly, with prices from 7p to 2 shillings and 6p. By 1965, the seating capacity had been reduced to 626. And if I remember correctly, the Palace at the time was a privately owned cinema and was the first in the area to install cinemascope and stereophonic sound. The cinema closed in 1985, the cinema closed in 1977 and was sold to Rushmore Council, who leased it out, and it subsequently reopened in December the same year. The Palace eventually closed in 1985, and by then a Grade 2 listed building stood derelict until 1989, when it was restored at a cost of £1 million and converted to a nightclub called Cheeks. This later became The Vox. In 2010, the building reverted to its original name and began putting on events and live music. The next picture is of the Pavilion Cinema. Now, the Pavilion Cinema was adjacent to Manor Park and was built about 1924-1925 and was originally screened silent films, but was updated and refurbished by the 1930s and was the first cinema in Aldershot to screen talkies and generally ran second-run screenings which had been transferred from the ABC or the Odeon. The picture shows an advert for Dracula. Now, Dracula, shown in the advert, was shown in 1931. The cinema closed in September 1956 and became a fruit and veg depot. The Star Cinema Group wanted to reopen it as a bingo hall in the early 1970s, but this never happened, and the building was demolished and replaced with an office block. Now, the next picture is the one of the Rex Cinema in Farnham, because there were two other cinemas in the area. Now, the Rex Cinema seated 1,218, and it was closed in the mid-1970s to make way for the Kingsmead Shopping Centre. There was also the Regal in East Street, of which I don't have a record or a photograph, but it closed during my courtship days with my girlfriend Anne, who later became my wife. Now, Anne lived at Frensham, and the big problem was, living at Frensham, was that if you wanted to go to the cinema in the evening, the last bus always left before the end of the film. So, as you know, in those old days, cinema performances were continuous. So Anne always saw the end of the film first at the penultimate performance, otherwise she would miss the last bus home. Now, I mentioned previously that I never made any money out of showing films, but the payoff came in 1996 when I auctioned my collection of 300 film posters at Christie's in London. The next picture shows my picture poster from Goldfinger, shown on the front of the catalogue. Proceeds from the sale were around £15,000. Not all posters were worth a lot, but some were. So my 2 quads and double crown for the Searchers raised £1,500. My single quad for Dr. No and the 2 quads for Goldfinger raised £1,100. The Goldfinger quad, as I said before, was on front of the catalogue. Last year, a Dr. No quad was sold at Sotheby's in the USA for £87,500 and Goldfinger for £11,250. Maybe I should have waited another 20 years before I sold my collection of film posters. Having been involved with film in my early years, followed by a huge gap when I needed to pursue my career, guess who was highly delighted at the inception of Fleet Film? Now in its 6th year, we are one of the most successful film societies in the south of England. And as head of film selection, I am absolutely back in my element. Now, finally, early on I mentioned that I loved westerns, and we listened to a piece of music from the big country. Hollywood westerns declined in the 1960s, only to be taken over by spaghetti westerns, directed by Sergio Leone, and with music from that wonderful Italian composer, Ennio Morricone. Music plays such a vital part in films. So as a final clip, let us listen to Ennio Morricone conducting his theme from Cinema Paradiso in San Marco Square in Venice. Let's just listen to Enrico Morricone and Cinema Paradiso. That was a bit struggly at the end, but not to worry.